Thank you. Welcome members, officers and invitees to the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our meetings. I've not received any requests to use Welsh today, so our meeting will be conducted in English only. Please remember to turn off your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into the microphones, and also remember that this meeting is being webcast. Again, in case of a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. Members, I've circulated the attendance register, if you could sign that. And have there been any apologies for this meeting?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillors Nicholas Jones and Neil Waite.
Thank you. Members, agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do you have any declarations that you need to declare?
I've got something about the Arbed scheme on the declaration.
Thank you. Agenda...
Sorry, Chair, can I just come in? I have spoken with Tim James, the legal officer, as well, just if any members are landlords as well, to declare that, please.
Then I need to declare that interest as a private landlord. Agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of March 2019. These minutes relate to the meeting we had to scrutinise the introduction of in-house civil parking and environmental enforcement. Members, I'm assuming that you've read through these minutes. Can you confirm that they are an accurate record? Yeah? Lovely, thank you. And then we're on to agenda item 4, which is the action sheet. Becky, are there any outstanding actions?
Thank you, Chair. I emailed all members of the committee the responses to the recommendations from the last meeting. So all I can say is if you do have any questions or comments, if you drop me an email and I will make sure they're fed back to the appropriate person.
Thank you. We're now going on to agenda item 5, the local housing strategy. The purpose of this report is for the committee to assess how the housing service and its partners are performing against the strategy and whether they are meeting the aims and objectives. I'd like to welcome the officers and the executive member to our meeting. Neil Howell, who is the Head of Housing, Commissioning and Service Transformation. Elka Wilton, Group Manager for Housing. Robert Murray, our Principal Planner. Executive Member for Communities, Housing and Anti-Poverty, Councillor David Daniels. And Adrian Hackin, who's here from Melin Homes. Welcome. I'll give you a minute to settle in. And when you're ready, could you please present your report? Thank you.
Everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I'll kick off just by giving us an overview of the report. Members will be aware that we, as a local authority, approved the latest local housing strategy last year, which will run for 3 years from 2018 to 2021. Each year, the intention is to develop an action plan or an operational plan which identifies the key tasks that we look to deliver against the strategy. I think it's important to remember that the strategy, whilst it's coordinated and developed by the local authority, is actually a strategy that covers all of our key stakeholders and partners. So a lot of our partners, like colleagues in other service areas and the local RSLs, are critical to the delivery of the strategy as a whole. In the report, under paragraph 2.2, we've identified some of the key challenges that I know members will be understand and aware of. Namely that we really do struggle locally with land availability to deliver new homes, more homes. And also there are challenges in terms of delivering more affordable housing across the borough. We get an increase in demand for social rented accommodation. The numbers of people joining the Home Seeker Register increasing year on year, and the numbers of properties that become available to let probably remaining static. We have got an increasing number of owner-occupiers who live across the borough who apply for support and assistance in terms of the housing service. The quality of the private rented sector is deteriorating at an alarming rate. What we've got in positively is the achievement of Welsh housing quality standards by the RSLs, the housing associations, and largely they've achieved those standards, both Melin and Bronavon being the largest RSLs in Torfaen. They've largely achieved those Welsh housing quality standards as required by Welsh Government, but unfortunately the same can't be said for the private rent sector, and we have got a deteriorating sort of quality within the private rent sector, private rent sector, but also across the private sector in its entirety. We have variances in terms of the level of demand in parts of the borough. There's much more demand for affordable housing in the south of the borough as opposed to the north. So we do get vacancies through our RSL colleagues. We do get an increasing number of bids being placed against properties that become available in the south as compared to the north. And there are pockets in the north of the borough whereby we've got, I suppose, a supply of affordable homes, but not necessarily in the areas that people would choose, and or, I suppose, the size and type of property that becomes available. Members will be very aware from your surgeries the challenges that we face in terms of the welfare benefit reforms and universal credit, which is having a significant impact, and benefit caps. And lastly, I suppose, we've got quite a small private rented sector in Torfaen. We are trying to encourage the development of that, but it is quite a challenge, I suppose, because we've got a lot of landlords, private sector landlords, who are actually pulling out of the market because of challenges that they face as well. So those are some of the challenges. What you'll see in the following paragraphs, I'm not going to go into any detail, but from points 3.7 through to 3.12, 3.13, is really a summary of what we are doing from both the local authorities, our stakeholders and our partners' perspective, what we're doing to tackle those challenges that we face. But unless you want me to go into some detail in terms of the paragraphs there, but that's all I was really going to suggest today, is really remind members of the challenges we face, and I suppose the report itself identifies a range of issues that we've done over the last 12 months as part of the Local Housing Strategy Action Plan to start to mitigate and deal with some of those challenges that we face.
Thank you. So, members, we have some questions. Councillor Evans.
Welcome, everyone. Question I got is relevant to paragraph 2.1. Do we keep a record of how many people live in RSL properties that own their own homes? And if so, how many, and what impact this is having on the housing list?
I don't think we specifically keep a record of. Let me just clarify. You're asking if we do keep a record of people, tenants of RSLs, but they own their own homes. The short answer is no. But I would supplement that by saying I don't think there's going to be many of those people who own their own homes. We have got owner-occupiers who do apply to join the Common Housing Register, and largely those people have applied because their current property do not meet their needs, and it could be, for instance, the property is too large for them to maintain, their personal circumstances have changed, they're under-occupying the property, or their medical circumstances have changed. So we do allow people to join the Common Housing Register, and then they are subsequently potentially rehoused. What we do require of them subsequently, obviously, for them to dispose of their property that they own. So they're either in the process of selling the property, or subsequently they should be selling the property that they own.
So what checks are we putting in place to actually make sure that is happening, rather than, just surmising that somebody disposed of their property or signed it over to their siblings? Or, what checks are we doing? Because really, if we're not doing any checks, then this can affect the housing list. you know, and the amount of people who got on it. It may be many, it may be few, but it still has an impact.
Sorry, and also, are there any built-in restrictions for that? I mean, I do get, and I fully understand and agree with people that for need to move out of, but in the scenario that isn't the case, is there anything built in that's a restriction there?
In terms of the home seeker allocation policy, a person who's already got a home as a property owner, they would normally be classed as in low housing need. So they would normally go into the bronze band of the housing register.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on page 20, it's 2.2. Basically, where it states that there's a limited amount of suitable and available land for new housing and development. Now, I'm sure I've asked this question before, and basically, shouldn't there be more direct contact with ward members? Because, especially in my ward, where we can identify areas that are suitable for redevelopment or available to be built on. Shouldn't there be more of a collaboration between yourselves and ward members?
There is currently, obviously, you'll be aware that there's a review of the LDP ongoing, and as part of that process, obviously there is an opportunity for members to feed into the identification of land, and I suppose what we are currently doing is looking at the allocation of land as it stands at the moment, what it's sort of identified as being potentially utilised for in the future. So there is a great opportunity as it exists now for members to play a part in actually shaping the new LDP. I don't know if Rob, if you want to come in and supplement that. And
yes, actually we were focused on the replacement LDP, which we started in June, July last year. We have had a call for sites process where I think we informed all members of this process and asked for any potential sites which could be put forward as part of that process. Now, we did put an end date on that, but we're still in the business of kind of collecting evidence. So if there's any other suitable sites which haven't been put forward, we still would be willing to accept those. We're not going to kind of reject good sites just because they didn't come in their time. If they can be utilised, then the sooner we can know about those, the sooner we can do it. We are doing the assessments of those sites at the moment because we're building up to a preferred strategy potentially in October, November this year. And so obviously we need to know what sites we have available in order to kind of process that the various options which we have. This will lead to a significant kind of consultation with stakeholders, which we're carrying out potentially May, June this year as well, on various subjects, not only housing, but kind of economy and various other aspects which we'll be going through. So the sooner we can know about sites, obviously we can put them in. Obviously, Bronavon and others have put in sites, but obviously there's some are suitable, some are not. You know, so kind of the more land we have available to play with, the kind of the greater options which we have to put forward. And say we will be looking at suitability of sites, obviously accessibility, what are the uses they are, kind of biodiversity on them, things like that, through to whether they're used for amenity. But if there are any potential sites which you know, kind of aren't being fully utilised and would be best for bringing forward new housing, obviously we'd be interested to know about those.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the sites that myself and Councillor Slade have already put into Bronavon, we're probably better served send them to you then.
Bronavon have obviously put sites into us, and we've produced the register which is available on the website. So I say if they're not already on the register, then by all means send them to us, yes.
Thank you, thank you. Then on to Councillor Slade. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So ominous. So the part of the question I think that you also asked, the second half of that question is on a sort of a member level, and I can answer, you know, being a fellow member myself. And I think we've had this conversation in a public and one-to-one sort of setting, in that I know that there have been several contentious applications going in particular in your ward and in several other members' wards around the table. And I have been from one RSL in particular. I'm having conversations with RSLs, in particular Bronavon, around discussions of what they've got in the pipe work, what land that they've got, what plans that they've got for that land, what developments they've got in mind. Because from a pragmatic point of view, I would like to see, because you'll see in the report we've got 2,600 people on the waiting list. I would like to see that addressed by having more accessible properties. And of course, RSLs clashing with members over developments in their wards isn't the way to go around it. So from my perspective, the pragmatic way forward is to have a dialogue with those RSLs, in particular Bronavon, as I've said, and talk about having a free-flowing conversation between members around what they've got planned for areas of land in your ward. So you can have that conversation. You can say, I don't know if that's going to work, sort of thing. Just plan a mutual way forward. So hopefully that answers part of the second half of your question.
Yeah, well, that kind of did happen with myself and Councillor Slade. With Bronavon, we tried to save all the hassle with contentious arguments where certain pieces of land were involved by taking them round different areas within the ward, showing them where they could build without having any contentious arguments with residents and our constituents. So I feel we kind of led the way on that and opened that opportunity up. It's just, I'm a little bit concerned if that is going to be nailed down and they are going to look into that more deeply.
I'm not sure with regards to that particular application. I'm more than happy to sort of query it after this, in conjunction with yourself. I don't think I was clear enough when I was saying further down the line, so before we get to that point, because I don't think it's useful when they suddenly spring it upon and say, right, we've got this plan for your ward, because by that point, it's far too late. You need to talk to the members who know their areas, who know their residents. So I think it's much, much further downstream, so we can talk to our members. We're a key part of, and I can speak from as a member, we're a key part of delivering this. And we know our wards and we know what we need in our wards. So it's further downstream. That's the conversation I'm having with RSLs and in particular Bronavon. And I mention it only because I know that there's a particular application that we've discussed.
Yeah, I mean, we've done that with Alan Brunt now from Bronavon. So I think hopefully he's taken that exact idea that we gave him in the first instance on board.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. On page 20, 2.2, it says a limited amount of suitable and available land, yet the candidate list for the new LDP, or the proposed LDP, has got over 10,000 properties proposed. Is it a question of limited land, or is it a question of sort of other issues? I mean, Mamoulan is a good example. It's a strategic area. Nothing's happened, seems to be happening there. So is it a limited availability of land, or are there really other issues that are preventing building?
Sorry, Rob. So in that, Rob will probably answer and correct me if I've got this wrong, but in that 10,000, that's a mix of land for private development, for RSL development, council land. So this report's talking about accessible housing, and we can only really develop accessible housing on council land, RSL land, because RSLs are the key partners in delivering that. So it's, sites like Mamoulan, what we can do is we can argue for a percentage of that.
Yes.
But, the vast majority, if that 10,000 is private developers like Barrett's or Taylor Wimpey or something like that, the vast majority of that will be private. So this is why this
RSL buying some of that land, surely.
this is outside of my expertise in terms of whether that's financially viable and whether that makes sense. This is probably where Adrian can answer, actually.
Robert. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
It's interesting, actually. There's a couple of things I may suggest, perhaps, and also pick up your point about what we look at in terms of viability, I suppose, because there's sometimes some discussions that, particularly in the north of Torfaen, you know, is it as viable to develop in the north of Torfaen as it is in the south without sort of public money or support through a social housing grant? And we do work closely with Neil and the team on that. And I think in Melling we've proved that is the case because we are developing up there. But the south is obviously a little bit more lucrative in terms of, you know, the land values and the margins that you've got, particularly sites like, you know County Hall, Mermailet, etc. I think one of the things I think we did flirt and talk about last time that we could consider and have a look at. I think Councillor Daniels has hit the nail on the head where he was talking about public sector land. I'll come back to the private sector, but the public sector land is quite interesting because if we were prepared to look at it differently, and Welsh Government are starting to look at this from a social housing grant perspective, and I don't just mean the council-owned land in Torfaen. You know, we've got Health Board land, we have Llanfrecffer, and you know, and etc. etc. If we were to look at the public sector assets in a slightly different way, and I would say this obviously, but work with, you know, with partner organisations in probably some sort of joint venture, I think you would bring some of these sites to market, or in terms of development terms, a lot quicker. We're still achieving the same margins you do too for the land, and also delivering a number of affordable units, because obviously as associations we're not for profit, so it's going back into the community. Where it's private sector land, it gets a little bit more difficult, and when it's in the ownership, and probably Mermailet is a classic example of that, because we're constantly having discussions with the landowners there about releasing that, and I know it's in the LDP, it's a candidate site and so on, but again it comes back to the margins and the deals that you can do and what's expected for the land in terms of value. And of course, you know, clearly they would be looking, you know, for top dollar where they can. But what we do there is we do try and enter into particular deals with certain key developers there, and that could be through the Section 106 route, or it could be through other ventures. It's just a little bit more difficult with getting the private sector land to market. But I do think that although land is not, you know, as we'd like it in Torfaen, is not, you know, as much as we would like. I take your point, and perfectly accept your point in terms of the number of units. If we looked at the way we deal with public sector land in a bit of a different way, you know, and we probably are going to talk about that, then we could, I think, bring forward more sites. And I think there's also conversation, and I've had a chat with the planners about this in Torfaen. There are some land that you've allocated as, I know it's at white land, they call it, I think, in technical terms, you know, but it's used for commercial and other purposes. Maybe there's a redesignation of some of those sites in parts of the borough. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I think there's something we can do on the public sector land. Sorry, Rob.
No, sorry. No. Yeah, just in relation to the say 10,000 units, the register is just basically a register of all sites which have been submitted to us. It doesn't judge which are good sites, which are bad sites, which ones are completely unacceptable, and it will depend on basically on the strategy which is selected by members as to how we go forward, as to how many the target we're looking for, as to how many units we're looking to housing units we're looking to bring forward as part of the planning process. Now that's obviously got a lot of things to make sure you have the supporting infrastructure, make sure you have the supporting economy and jobs, that you can't just develop housing in a kind of vacuum. It's got to be associated with growth in the economy and jobs and things like that. And so it will be an important part, as I say, of the preferred strategy of the kind of housing target we're looking for. Again, the workshops which we'll be looking at will be looking at the various scenarios. Do we go for low growth? Do we go for high growth? Obviously, if you go for high growth, you can bring forward more units, potentially more affordable units, but therefore you then have the conflict between green spaces, kind of settlement expansion and things like that, which again can be unpopular and can cause, as a infrastructure, like on the road networks, can cope with it and so on. So that will all be as part of the work of the LDP as to how many we're looking to bring forward there. Also, the list is only intended to cover kind of 10 units or more. So obviously there's plenty of kind of windfall potential of sites which cater for under 10 units. So that those can come forward just the normal planning process through infilling, rounding off and so on as part of the normal plan. So the plan will look at that as well. Plus, the viability argument is again key, because the previous plan we had affordable housing percentages which we should be delivering, but it all gets thrown into the mix as to what a site can develop. Now, if you've got a very, say, flat greenfield site, well accessed, then there should be no problem in providing the full affordable housing percentage to make a fully viable site. But the problems we have very few of those sites, and again, they bring forward their own problems, because obviously greenfield is a kind of a thing where we're looking to try and promote brownfield first. If we're promoting brownfield, there's additional costs, and therefore the additional costs, you know, it's often it gets to a choice between, well, do we put the money into highways infrastructure? Do we put it into our additional school places needed? And then that also has to balance with what kind of affordable housing delivery can we get there. So sometimes we can't achieve all the objectives we're looking at, and there will have to be a choice as to what to take precedence. And Minehead is a good example. There's a significant amounts of kind of costs which through the listed building, through the highways works, through to ground contamination and so on, which all need to be kind of dealt with, and therefore that would probably mean that the full affordable housing offer would not be able to be achieved in there. And looking at the range of sites we got, another key decision for the plan will be, well, what are our affordable housing targets that we're going to set for the new plan? And again, that will be based on where the money, the potential funding goes. Again, there's a huge demand for say improving the road network, the school places. Say if we are looking for a big growth, then school places have got to be funded somehow. And so all of those kind of priorities will be competing for the the funding which will come with those. So those are the kind of decisions which the plan will look to address, and it's not an easy answer. There's lots of competing objectives which we try and find a balance to find the most sustainable way through that, and which is also politically acceptable as well. So that's quite a task for the plan, and I say hopefully the work we're doing May, June, July will attempt to address those and bring forward obviously the options, and therefore we'll test all the options against sustainability criteria, and again bring that back to members for them to obviously make the choice whether they agree with the preferred strategy on the way forward.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Evans. Of course you can, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I would just say, I don't think it is a question of there's a limited amount of land, because the argument about the private sector against the public sector, we owned the land at Llantarnam School, yet we were happy to sell it off to a private developer. We could have developed that further. We owned the site at County Hall. Again, that's a political choice to sell that land off to a private developer.
Llantarnam Primary School.
Llantarnam Primary School is another one. So, yeah, I think there's more that we can be doing, because of the current policy. It just seems to me that social housing is just coming up in drips and drabs. Some very small numbers on, which is why, Bron Abbott have been encouraged to try and build on postage stamps and pinch bits of open space within our communities, to be honest. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
All the sites you mentioned there are delivering, are fully compliant with our Section 106. They're all delivering the full affordable housing offer on the sites you mentioned. Obviously, it is a choice if it is our land, if we want to provide all we can. But obviously, it's still making sure sites are viable and you're delivering on everything else as well. So the way you set those percentages is obviously to ensure that sites can come forward. It would be 100% affordable housing, instead of which we got 30%. So that was the point. Yeah, I'll say the receipts go in for paying for schools and so on. So it's those kind of decisions which are the political ones.
It's a dilemma, really. Since I've been in post, I've made it my mission to argue for any patch of land that's in our ownership, any school that's come to pass, for that to be first dibs for affordable housing, because that is, I'm absolutely laser focused on the fact that there's no such thing as a silver bullet, but if there is, anything that comes close is building more affordable properties. So certainly, that is an argument I've been making. These are developments prior to my time, but even then, I do think that it's understandable, because, as Rob's just said, I mean, the capital from that went to pay for schools, went to pay for new schools, went to pay for other sort of community projects. So I think that it's high time we have investment in housing, which is the argument I'm making, but I can equally understand the investment that we put into 21st century schools and other things, because we've got competing priorities, and they're equally as sort of needed as the other, really. So, even retrospectively, I can understand it, even though I'd argue differently now.
Okay. Councillor Evans.
The question I got is, how do RSLs engage with the communities?
Neil said we don't. It's a joke. I can obviously speak for Melyn, but I think generally, RSLs is probably true. I mean, in Melyn, apart from, I think it's right at the heart of the organisation, we have a fully resourced community engagement team and section, anyway, run by Carlin, Morgan and Alan. So I suppose the issue for us, really, I suppose it started when we repurposed the organisation a few years back. We've always been working in communities across Torfaen, but putting our residents in particular and communities at the heart of the business. And that started a couple of years ago when we did the vision and the values. And in practical terms, what does that mean, really? Well, that means that we're pleased to have a seat around the PSB at a high level, and the RPB as well, which is really important. But more importantly, that is the work on the ground, really. So I think it's working in and with those communities, really. We've got a significant investment programme. The majority of our community investment programme is spent in the Torfaen area, because that's where we've got the most of our stock at the moment. We've got circa about 1,800 properties, another 200 over the next year, so we'll have about 2,000 units in the area. But it's not working in isolation, and that's the important thing. I think any community development and community engagement work, I think it's getting repurposed, because I think with the way the PSB is looking at some of the wellbeing objectives and having the pilot, particularly that we're all involved with in Blenavon, for instance, as an example, and some of the community hub work that's going on up there should give a re-energy of the kind of purpose that we're doing. But where we started, really, I suppose, is very much on the ground with our residents, and some of the things, I suppose, in Torfaen we're kind of proud of are things like our schools programme. Started with Abercycle School, funny enough. It started in Torfaen, and we were working very closely with the head. And the reason for that was we had a lot of residents living in the area. A lot of the children were going to the school. The school were having a problem with getting the children to school, so we were working with the parents. And we did a lot of diversionary work there, and a lot of it was involved in conjunction with our sporting partners, which in our case happens to be the Dragons and the county in Newport. But the reason for that scheme that we set up was to get young people kind of involved, So it makes good sense that we're involved, and it makes good business sense. The more people that we're involved with, I suppose, at the end of the day, they pay the rents. We've got to provide the services, really. So the investment is quite significant, and I think most RSLs or housing associations really have recognised that over the years, that you've got to invest in the people and in the communities. And I hope some of that rubs off at very much a localised ward level. But even with the developments we've been talking about, there's an economic dividend for some of the developments. I was just totting up the next year's schemes, and we got about 16 million quid coming to Torfaen, in the next couple of years from different routes. It's not just the money being brought in, the homes on the back of that. It's the apprenticeships. And a couple of years back, we set up a shared apprenticeship scheme called The Apprentice, which covers South East Wales. And I'm pleased to say we've got a number of youngsters from Torfaen through that scheme, and more importantly, young ladies through the apprenticeship scheme, because it's a construction apprenticeship scheme, this is. So we need to do more. And I think that's the issue of collectively, can we do more really in terms of apprenticeships, traineeships and so on. But in terms of listening to what the needs are of the community, I suppose, that's quite important for us, and I'm pleased that we're part of the kind of PSB work that we're doing. And then finally to say that we also run our own kind of litmus tests, I suppose, satisfaction surveys with our own residents about the services that we're currently providing, and that's also important to the board. And that brings up one or two things where we've changed our service direction, particularly with the reinvestment and reinforcement of things around welfare reform. I'm not being too complacent, because it's different to running an association like Mellon to perhaps a large-scale voluntary transfer organisation. We've got more of our residents into where we don't have some of the same problems as larger organisations do when some of the welfare reform changes. Maybe because of the way we're set up and the demographic. I'm not saying that universal credit has hit us all, because it has, but a way of trying to get through that is to get people into work, and that's what we focused on. So, again, it's a bit of a long-winded, rambling answer, but the reality is, I can give you some facts and figures on investment, but it really is at the heart of what we're doing. It's community-based, and that's why we're obviously proud to be a community-based association, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking at the 2,600 applicants on Home Seeker, and it says approximately 50 new applicants applying to join the register each week. Over a year, that's 2,600. So are we saying that the list is kind of doubling, or at what rate is it increasing? How many are coming off Home Seeker?
Okay, we do an annual review of the register, because some people apply to join the register just in case. The vast majority of people don't. I think they apply to the register, and we see more and more people applying because they can't get their foot on the property ladder, and there are limited alternative opportunity for people to get into their own homes. As I said earlier, I suppose as part of the introduction, we've got probably an average of about 700, 800 units that are made available each year between the RSL partners. So there is a healthy turnover there of properties. But I suppose without the review that we undertake, we do a sort of monthly review of the register. Anybody who's been on the register for 12 months, we write out to and ask them if they still want to remain. We do see a lot of drop-off there. Some people come back to us and say, I didn't receive the letter, or I've changed my circumstances, etc. They rejoin the register, or they start again, or we reinstate from the date that they originally applied. You have got a handful of people, a small amount of people that sort of have been on the register for some time. Largely, those people are quite specific about their requirements. They are looking for a specific locality, specific type of property, or they, a specifically adapted property that will suit their needs. If we didn't do that annual review, the register would continue to grow. But I think we've introduced that arrangement over the last couple of years, and it does help to maintain the register. It doesn't mean that, I suppose, there isn't a demand there. There are still lots of people who don't apply to us because they don't think they've got a chance of getting rehoused. And it depends. You have referrals from members or general public, etc. And they say, "Well, we've got no chance." Well, we encourage everybody to apply, and then they're assessed against the criteria in the policy, which is a needs-based policy. But it is quite a sort of healthy register. If we didn't do that maintenance and that sort of annual review, that number would significantly increase. And there's a large number of hidden people, I suppose, that haven't applied and don't apply to the register. The one thing I would say is that we have to undertake a needs assessment. The numbers of people on the register is only one part of, I suppose, the needs that exist out there. Not everybody will apply and become homeless, for instance. Eventually, goes onto the register. So there'll be other people, and of course we have another register of people who are interested in help to own. So if you add all the numbers up, it'll be significantly over the 2,600 people.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want to go back in?
No, that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
be honest, I feel like I may be able to better answer that with statistics in front of me. So, you know, I think just for future reference, I think it would be helpful just to have a heads up if there's going to be anything sort of statistically based, because, you know, I feel like, you know, between us we could have given a very good answer to what you've asked. I mean, we'll come back to you with an answer, but it's just for future reference.
Okay. Have you got something now, Councillor Daniels, or not yet? Okay. My question is, in the same paragraph, 2.3 on page 20. In the report it says there's 240 first-time buyers waiting for housing. How has this impacted the local housing strategy?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, sorry, Councillor Thomas.
No, I knew you was going to ask me that. So there's 240 first-time buyers waiting for housing that you've put in your report? Yes. Yeah. So how has this impacted the local housing strategy? Yeah. Sorry, yeah, I put it the wrong way round. Sorry, I do apologise.
Okay, I suppose one of the things we do is we're required to do every year is develop a local housing market assessment, and that identifies, I suppose, that broader need across a range of the whole of the housing market in all 10 years. That's allowed us, I suppose, a better insight into the types of accommodation that people in Torfaen are looking for. So, in terms of trying to meet that need, those 240 people have applied to us, and obviously that's constantly changing. People will come onto the register, people will move off, because working with our RSL partners, we are developing low-cost home ownership, different packages, etc. So people are successfully going through the system. But again, you've got 240 people on average at any one time who are on that. So people are coming onto the register, and people are being housed off it. I suppose what the local housing market assessment has assisted us to do is really to identify the percentages of different types of accommodation and the affordability of that accommodation on an annual basis. So for instance, we will, on any development, we will look at to identify a range of affordable housing, social housing, I suppose, so rented accommodation, but also a percentage of low-cost home ownership. So depending on the interest for that product, that helps us to identify, I suppose, what type of development we will continue to work with our partners, like Mellon and Bronhaven, on an ongoing basis, on an annual basis, I suppose. So it'll help us to identify the percentage of need on each one of those developments over a 12-month period.
Could I add to that? I suppose what Torfaen's housing strategy is about, an enormous priority is about affordable housing, but it's also concerned with all tenures. So we're concerned with the quality of housing in the private sector, we're concerned, Torfaen, concerned with affordability of housing. So to be able to provide a range of types of tenures, such as Help to Own Plus, helps create that flow right across the housing market. So I suppose our strategy isn't just to help social housing, it's to help people access all types of housing. And if we provide some of the intermediate types of products, which are sort of in between the extreme social housing and the private, it means the flow through housing is better. And it also means, for example, those 240 households who would have been housed through Help to Own won't have been a demand on, for example, social housing. So it helps create a sort of a mixed tenure market that all of our residents can try and access.
Yeah, I think just in relation to the planning when new developments are coming forward, obviously work with housing to identify not just the percentage of affordable housing, but what the mix should be to basically cater for the various need sectors, and that will vary geographically as well as kind of thing. So it's making sure that the mix as well as the overall percentages is suitable for that particular development coming forward.
Councillor Evans.
On the paragraph 2.4, homelessness support, how can members access immediate support when needed? Because sometimes you can't get through by phone, or perhaps a bit of a delay with the internet. and sometimes it needs to be done on a priority. Is there another way we could sort of bring the members?
So was it paragraph 2.4?
Yeah, homelessness, yeah.
In particular, there's reference here to a financial inclusion team which provides support to residents that you'll be dealing with in your constituencies. So we've got a referral pathway for that, which we can pass on to you. Was it support in particular for members or for members' constituents?
Well, if you've got somebody who's got an issue within your ward and you need to contact somebody a matter of urgency, sometimes you can't get through on the phone lines, perhaps they're busy or because of the weather situation. I mean, is there any alternative way a member can get some sort of movement quickly rather than there being a delay? Yeah,
in extreme circumstances, you could obviously contact the Housing Solutions team, which have a duty to provide assistance and options, housing options advice. So we can pass that information on to you. If it's specifically linking in with a support service or a member of the housing service, there's also a gateway. There's a referral gateway that we operate within housing, so we can make sure that you've got that information as well, that then a member of staff will contact the individual or could talk to you, albeit the client or the constituent would be happy to share that information. So we can make that information available.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We'll resend out the all the contact information for in hours and out of hours to all members. And what you can do is, if there's any gaps that you can see in there, then you can raise that to our attention, and we'll make sure that those gaps are filled. All right.
Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This particular question I'm quite passionate about, so I'd like a real in-depth answer on this if it's possible. It's on page 21, it's 3.3. Home is a crucial factor in a person's welfare. How much consideration do we give to individual circumstances? So, for an example, if there's a family that desperately needs to stay in Cwmbran, but yet is only offered a property in Pontypool or Blanavon, how much do you take into consideration their individual circumstances?
It would depend on which route and their circumstances the individual were actually in. So, for example, if the individual or household was sat on the Common Housing Register and they were at risk of homelessness, we have a duty to undertake a suitability of accommodation assessment, which we use to determine, we look at the circumstances of the household, and we would determine whether living in a certain area was suitable to their circumstances. Within that assessment, for example, we would take into account any antisocial behaviour, access to different services such as support, care or schools or whatever. So each case is very different. So there's the homeless route, but if somebody were just sat on the Common Housing Register, on the home seeker waiting list, again, we would look at their requests for area of preference, and it might be if there wasn't, they would be in their band. If there wasn't an urgent need, it might be that we would say fine in terms of your area of preference, but you'll be bidding and it may take longer to actually be offered a property because you're decreasing the amount of areas that you have access to. So it depends on the circumstances of the household.
Can I give you a scenario of something that I've witnessed? If a family is living in Cwmbran and they are going to lose their home, okay, and they desperately rely on their family, they're based in Cwmbran, and the only thing that's being offered to them is Blanavon, that's, what can you do about that? Because when I've come back to officers on this, it's basically, I'm sorry, councillor, there's nothing we can do. Even though that family is going to suffer deeply by you sending them up there, by you not being able to overturn that decision, I find that extremely upsetting.
brings me to the question that I was going to ask, because I'm not being parochial, because I'm going to make this general, but in that same scenario, an officer decides whether evidence, massive amounts of evidence is submitted, and an officer is responsible for saying yes or no to that appeal or that process. Where does it go from? If an officer has then made the end decision, where is the appeal to that? Is there a housing appeals panel? Is there a process? I know there used to be a housing panel years ago, but where does someone that has submitted significant evidence and desperately needs to not only be around their own support network, but also have a caring role themselves, maybe jobs locally, children in local schools? How do they balance that up? How does a no, you have to take what you're given, and outweigh any evidence that's submitting that's overwhelming? Where does that go?
Okay. The only way of me answering that is by giving you some, I suppose, facts and figures, really. At any one time, we've probably got 80 people in temporary accommodation who actually are homeless. They are homeless, and we put them in temporary accommodation. We'll have another 120 cases across the homeless caseworkers who are threatened with homelessness. We'll have 200, 300 applicants on the housing register who have been given top priority, gold band priority. And we'll have 10 properties available. Okay? Torvine is a small borough. It's, 13 miles long and it's 5 miles wide. We can't conjure up more properties. We can only work with the properties that are made available via, that have become empty, void, via our RSL partners. So at any one time, in any one week, we're probably dealing with 400 urgent housing cases. Now, you have to play God, unfortunately, and it's not something I like to say, but that's the reality. We have got a policy that's been approved by members. It's a banding system which identifies gold, silver, bronze, homelessness. The point I made earlier on the start of the start of this is the demand is outstripping supply. We haven't got enough affordable homes for people to be housed in the areas of their choice. So at any one time, there'll be a number of members here and there'll be other members across the council who will have those individual cases. I have every sympathy with you dealing with and trying to support those individuals. But if we haven't got the property available to offer somebody, if they are homeless, and you've only got one property to offer, that's the property you offer. It's as simple as that. It's a case of we haven't got choice in the matter because the properties that they don't exist or they're not available. So if in terms of we've got a statutory responsibility to discharge, we have to respond to somebody's needs. We have to make some judgments in terms of the priority cases. But the bottom line is that we've got so many cases that we're dealing with on a week-to-week basis and so little supply of properties, we're inevitably going to have to make the best that we can of those circumstances. Going on to the appeals, there is an appeals mechanism. If somebody's made a judgment about what is reasonable in terms of an offer, that is then escalated to the senior officer. And again, we've got procedures in place to make sure that a guidance then for that member of staff to make judgments about what is reasonable. But again, what is reasonable to one person potentially isn't reasonable to somebody else. And I can imagine, from your constituents' perspective, none of it's reasonable. But I think the reality is that what I'm trying to say is we've got such high demand for properties, and especially in the south of the borough, the numbers of cases that are coming through have increased. The complexity of the circumstances for the individuals has increased. We understand totally the need when you've got a family and you've got support mechanisms. Being threatened with homelessness, bad enough, but then being suggested that you move 6, 7, 8 miles up the valley, again, it's a very difficult scenario. It's back to the point I made earlier. Demand is outstripping supply. We have got we have got some availability in the north of the borough. It's not always in the right area. It's not always the right type of accommodation, but we've got significant difficulties in meeting demand from people who are born and bred in Cwmbran. I've got family networks in Cwmbran. I've got children schooling in Cwmbran, but there isn't the availability of properties that we'd really love to be able to deliver.
I get the availability question, but what I am also hearing, or I think I'm hearing, is that the lack of housing is influencing an officer's decision on whether the appeal has been valid or not, is what I'm hearing, because in certain circumstances there may be completely valid reasons for that appeal to be or for the officer to make a decision, but based on the fact that there are no available housing, the decision is not being it's been overruled, and there has to be a balance. I get all of your stats, I understand all of the stats, but behind every single one of those is a human being with emotions, with children that bang their head on the floor, with banging their heads on doors, with absolute distress. And I think that we shouldn't ever get to a point where the availability of homes the lack of availability of homes is influencing an officer's decision on whether somebody is allowed to stay in temporary accommodation until a more suitable a more suitable home comes up. And for me, that's quite worrying.
I'm sorry, I didn't say that.
No, it sounded like that.
Well, okay, if it did sound like that, I apologise, because that isn't the case. The bottom line is that every individual case is dealt with on its merits. We can only work with the information that's been supplied by the individual, and we have to make judgments about the reasonableness of the request from a significant number of appeals that are coming through the system. And it's not purely down to lack of availability in the south of the borough and the individual members' staff judgment. It is about the information that is made available. And the difficulty you've got is that it's what is reasonable, isn't it, in terms of transport, support and networks, etc. It's a significantly difficult time for the applicant, but equally our members of staff are human as well, and they have difficulty in making some of those judgments. But the bottom line is that it's back down to the supply, and especially the lack of supply and the affordable housing arrangements in the south of the borough.
And I understand all of that, and so the end decision is made by a senior officer. Where is the appeal process go then?
Yeah, just before that's answered, I mean, you did say, Neil, that sometimes an officer, whether it was you or somebody else, is playing God with a decision. That is unacceptable to certain families. These sort of decisions can destroy a child's future. So something needs to be done there in a drastic way.
There obviously needs to be policy that needs to be followed, and there shouldn't be a scenario where the lack of housing is influencing a decision. If the policy is there, the policy needs to be followed.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just add, to be clear, that the Housing Wales Act 2014, which made quite significant changes. We're talking about homeless households here, are we? Made quite significant changes to the duties of a local authority in relation to homelessness. The law is quite clear, so the officer making any decisions will follow the letter of the law. So that is the policy in one respect. So, well, I won't comment on that, but we follow the letter. The officers follow the letter of the law. I absolutely agree. The lack of available affordable housing exacerbates the availability of stock. That significantly, we have a housing crisis in Torfaen. We know that. We see it on the news. I've mentioned it a number of times. It does exacerbate the availability of preference for accommodation across the county. And that's why we talk about development of new properties, etc., etc. But just to be clear, the officers will follow the letter of the law around making a homelessness decision and any suitability of accommodation offer. What exacerbates that, so that decision stands true. What exacerbates it is the level of housing. So, for example, if somebody sat in our temporary accommodation and we had lots of properties coming through, they would move on very quickly. And their area of preference would they'd be able to bid, and they would move to wherever it would be much more quickly. Because we've got the conundrum and the dilemma and we haven't got those properties coming through, it takes longer. The decision-making around homelessness is a number of sections, and we had the last scrutiny session we had around the Gwent homelessness strategy and homelessness is very clear, and officers followed that. In terms of decision-making, an officer would usually make a decision, an appeal, there is a process of appeal which is laid down in statute, which will go to the senior officer, members of the public, and also linking with Shelter Cymru, which are the sort of the umbrella body who work very closely on a legal footing with local authorities and clients around homelessness decisions. But unfortunately, the law is the law. The other area we haven't mentioned is we still have, with the changes in the law and the increased duties on the local authority, we can now discharge our duty into the private rented sector. And the other concern we often find is our households who we're working with, very vulnerable households in extremely difficult circumstances. We can, by law, discharge our duty into a private rent, and people don't want a private rent. And we could say, well, the law says this is suitable for you. It might even be in the right area. It might be where the household wants to live, and quite often the household won't want to live in a private rent. They would rather a social rent. And we understand security of tenure. So we've got that conundrum, which adds to the difficulties as well. So it's an enormous problem. The decision-making, I'm confident in the decision-making. There is a process of appeal, and it is robust, and there are times when appeals can overturn an initial decision. But the fact is, the lack of available properties, whether it's private rents or social housing rents, and people's choices don't always match up.
Can perhaps members have access to all of the documents you've listed? So that, because I know there are a number of people sitting around the table that would like to get their teeth into that in more depth, myself included. So, final officer decision, where does that go to at appeal then?
The homelessness law says that a person who makes the decision, any appeal goes to a senior officer.
A senior officer says that that can be appealed. Where does then that then go?
Sorry, the officer makes the decision. An appeal will be seen by a senior officer.
Dr. Daniels?
Crikey. The worst bit is that I agree with you. It's not a given week when I don't have either a member bring a constituent or the constituent themselves contact me regarding circumstances much like that you've given. It's been a bit of a culture shock. It's been a bit of a shock for me since taking up this role to have families and individuals come to me with. I can say that they're all merit. They're all absolutely merit, and the circumstances that they're in are heartbreaking. And that's the worst part. Is that I totally agree with you. What I would say though is, if I'm being blunt and being honest, the talk of tweaking the policy is a distraction because it's just shifting the deck chairs. You've still got your 2,600 people on the waiting list. You're just rearranging them slightly differently. And this has, for me personally, the core function of this particular scrutiny would, for me, what would be most helpful is figuring out how we deliver more properties. Because in the south, particularly in the south of the borough, because on page 51, you've got a graph on there which shows you 65% of the bids were for properties in the south of the borough. That is our problem right there. And I totally understand that because I live in the south of the borough, my family are in the south of the borough, I would want to stay in the south of the borough. And I totally agree with the families that when they say that is what's best for me. And I know that the team do too, and I know that it's very hard personally on the team to deliver it when they totally sympathise as well. But like I said, tweaking the policy, I honestly think that would be shifting the deck chair slightly, and I think we have to be absolutely laser focused in how we deliver in the south of the borough. We really, really need more affordable properties in the south of the borough if we're going to address this substantially.
Sorry, Chair. Then the only big last comment I would like to make on this particular subject is that you said earlier that you were laser focused on getting the private developers to build the percentage to be raised, so we've got more homes built for the vulnerable families that we're talking about. So I do hope that your officers are listening to you on that, and that is something that is going to happen, because that is something that I'll be looking for in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I genuinely, and you know, it's not because they're here, I genuinely couldn't ask for a better set of officers to work with on this. And in this agenda, I mean, it isn't just us, it's everyone around this table, it's everyone in this council. You know, if you've got an idea, if you've got an initiative, if you've got constructive criticism, I will listen to it, and officers will listen to it, because at the end of the day, we need to build more accessible properties. We need to build them fast, and how we do that, I'm totally open to listening to.
You know, listening and talking is great, but we need to act now, don't we?
Sorry, Chair, can I just give a bit of advice then, I suppose, in that regard? It's back to the LDP. When the LDP is being considered, there needs to be a specific focus on members' requirements around what percentage of affordable housing you'd like to be delivered on future sites.
Yeah.
Sadly, that's reduced in my time significantly, and I think the fact that the council themselves don't own any council properties has had a massive impact and has tied our hands. We're reliant on other people and other organisations, and that in itself has generated a whole big problem. Because, you know, affordable housing isn't just RSLs, it's private houses that are made cheaper by part ownership, part rent, and there are growing concerns that in the long run that isn't affordable at all in the long run. So I think we do need to focus on your former council house type, you know, the RSLs, etc. And if that needs decisions in this council, particularly, you know, your cabinet role, then that needs to be dealt with. And I think, you know, that's where the decisions are made in this council, and it needs altering. And of course, we are talking with one hand tied behind our backs because we have no housing ourselves. You know, that happened in 2008, way before my time. But of course, you know, where we are where we are, and constituents were told that access to money to do the properties up wasn't available, and years down the line Caerphilly accessed that very money to do, I think it was Caerphilly, to do this. So we are where we are, but I agree with Dave. I really would like to see a focus on not just affordable, in fact, specific RSL type accommodation for what is the most need, I think.
I'm just going to say, just to reassure in a way, I just want to pick up Neil's point, because I think it's a very good point made, that and we're going to be looking at this too, because we're trying to identify sites, and we're going to be consulted with in terms of the LDP as well. There's a real opportunity in the LDP to try and push the agenda that I think we're all on the same page here today, aren't we, in terms of affordability. Just there's a couple of things that you've still got up your sleeve as well as a council, you know, that you have some control, you know. And I'm speaking of this as an RSL, you know. I mean, firstly, you know, it's around what I talked about earlier, you know, about public sector ownership of land in general terms. But there's also the planning system, you know, and what we're going through the consultation. And I do appreciate some of the pressures. There'll be some trade-offs. I perfectly understand that, and And I'm from, I'm from Cwmbran, and my kids have been growing up in the south, so I know some of the issues that we're talking about. But you still have got some tools in your armoury, and from an association point of view, we have to adhere to the planning policies and the policies of the council. Now, fortunately, we're heavily involved with the crafting of the housing strategy, so Neil and the team always involve us with that, and we listen to. But so I think that I wouldn't underestimate what some controls you've still got. There's some things that are out of your control completely, but there's some things within the control. And I think using the LDP process, probably having a different conversation at council about some of the priorities, and I am putting my housing hat on now, about where housing should figure. For me, it's a basic human right, and it's at the heart of every community, isn't it? So I think we have got an opportunity the next few months as we develop to have a different conversation. And the other thing, I just refer to one practical scheme as well, because I'm not sure whether you were talking about sort of a homeless case per se in Torfaen, but we also have had a decent scheme for a number of years, supported by Welsh Government and Torfaen in particular, where people have got into financial difficulties. It's called a mortgage rescue scheme. So we've had people, owner-occupiers, in areas who, in very tragic circumstances, have lost their home, lost their job, bankruptcy or whatever. But the mortgage rescue scheme, it's been a good product because it's enabled people to actually stay in their own home. The tenure changes. Very much the RSL take over, it becomes a rented product. But I only use it as an example because a lot of money's gone into it. It's a small scheme. But if we could prevent that happening, he'd prevent people presenting as homeless, wouldn't you? So it's a difficult one. It's not all doom and gloom. There are some opportunities, I think. But I think, from out of today and out of the consultation process with the LDP, I think we just need to be as much pressure as we possibly can to get as much affordable units as we possibly can on the sites. And from an RSL point of view, what we can then do on the back of that is bring in some private sector investment, because that's where, and we just borrow on the basis of mortgages over a period of time to do that. There's nothing so scientific about that. But we're looking at the way that we're borrowing at the moment as well, and borrowing differently to try and lever in more monies. So.
I think the feeling around the table generally is that yes, we agree with you, and we should now be putting pressure on. I'd also like to see the council as a whole. We've had a focus on the 21st Century Schools project now for a number of years. It's about time we switch focus, and that need to be delivered to our most vulnerable in housing terms, because it's time. It's not had a focus. The entire council has focused on 21st Century Schools for a number of years, and to the detriment of other things. And for me, now is the time that focus needs to. We are now on to Alan. I think your question 11.
Yeah, I'm going to change my question, actually, Chair, because I think it's clear that there is no definition. So my question is this. Everybody talks about the saying that Cwmbran is where everybody wants to live. What is council doing, or what is the strategy for making Blavan and north of the county a more attractive area for people to go and move to?
It's a really good question, and it's a number of different things, really. We recognise, I suppose, that the demand significantly outstripped supply in the south a number of years ago. And I think that what we recognise is that we need to do a bit more marketing, publicity, educating about what the north of the borough has to offer. So we've started on started some time ago on a piece of work, and it continues to go forward. We need to identify what community facilities, assets, etc., exist in the north of the borough, and to actually put a package, a profile together to help people, I suppose, make better informed choices about where they want to live in the future. So that process has started, really, to make sure, I suppose, because I think there are a lot of people who were born and brought up in the south of the borough, and I would not normally consider Pontypool, for instance, as an opportunity for rehousing, let alone going a bit further north, Abersac and Blenavon. But I think there's a lot of myths and uncertainty, I suppose, and comments that are made about, which are fairly negative about the north of the borough, which is not the case at all. So we've recognised that, and I suppose what we've tried to do really is to map what community facilities are available. You know, there are very good schools in the north of the borough. There are a number of different sort of community facilities, retail outlets, etc., etc. Again, to provide more information to people, to encourage them to consider. You know, at the end of the day, you can't force anybody to want to be housed anywhere. I suppose people will make decisions, etc. But I think it's about dispelling some of those myths, actually mapping what does exist, reminding people about the regular bus service, the transport links, etc. So it is about sort of revisiting, I suppose, the north offer for people when people are coming to us. And when people are starting to bid for properties, and maybe focusing on bidding for properties in the south, we are, as part of that process, then trying to say, have you thought about Pontypool? Have you thought about? So there's an active, ongoing process, really, to try to... Sorry?
Isn't that too late in the process? Because this is why we're ended up with people being forced to go up to 11 when they might have chose to at the beginning of the process. If you see what I'm saying, if it was an attractive proposition at the beginning, then people might actually advocate to go up there rather than be forced up there. And that's really what I'm asking. And I understand what you're saying about doing a study or whatever, but there's nothing in the strategy about that, is there?
Sorry, Councillor. It's an offshoot of the strategy. I suppose it's formed. It was developed as part of the action plan for the first year of the strategy. So it is about, say, trying to broaden people's knowledge about what else exists. Also, the availability of properties in the north of the borough. You know, it's true that it's probably 5/8 of the total number of properties that are available through the Common Housing Register become available in the south, but that means that 3/8 become available in the north. So it is an active, ongoing process, and it has been for a number of years. When people are coming, you know, we have an open register, and we have an opportunity for open choice. People can choose exactly. The choice-based register is exactly that. People can choose where they want to live. But there's been a process ongoing for some time now where we are trying to encourage people to broaden their choice, to consider other options, whether it be mid Torfaen or the north. That's been ongoing for some time. We're trying to map those community facilities on the GIS system now, so that we can have a pictorial. When people are applying to the Common Housing Register, we can actually provide them with the information and also put that on our websites about what exists in the north of the borough, because I think there are some misconceptions about what facilities or what is not available in the north of the borough. So that process and that activity has been ongoing for some time now.
Councillor Revan.
My question is to do with paragraph 3.7. In 1718, 17 new affordable homes were delivered across Torfaen. How does this compare to other local authorities? And the second part of this question is, have we looked at buying parcels of land to develop the type of housing that is in greatest demand in Torfaen?
No, they just sold it.
In relation to the first point around the level of affordable housing delivery, we do get, I think it's an annual report from Welsh Government, which illustrates how we fare across Wales. And we've tended to fare very well. So we're not meeting our affordable housing delivery targets, but we do have an understanding about how we fare compared to other local authorities across Wales. So we can dig that out and provide that to you if that's of any use. And it helps give us an idea, a litmus, a marker as to how we're progressing. We haven't mentioned it yet, and I think we also need to mention that Torfaen is such a small county geographically. When we talk about availability of land, we're a small county in terms of the levels of population, and I think that has an impact as well. I didn't quite catch the second part of the question, sorry.
Okay. I suppose the thing to point out is that Elke just offered that we can provide members with, I suppose, a snapshot of what we've been able to deliver over the last 5 years in terms of new affordable homes. We have got a proven track record of delivery and are very well supported by Welsh Government. I think year on year we've attracted significant levels of investment in terms of the social housing grant programme. And I think when you see that comparison, you will be able to see that we have been able to attract a significant amount. I suppose what I would say is we've punched above our weight in terms of attracting social housing grant and actually delivering more affordable homes compared to like-sized authorities across Wales. In terms of land purchase, there isn't any available resources to be able to do that. Now, I know from recent reports to Cabinet and Council that there may be an additional allocation of capital for Torfaen going forward over future years. We may have additional allocation from Welsh Government. That may be something that we want to consider, or members will want to consider in terms of the options going forward. We talked in the past about capital receipts being utilised for investment in 21st century schools and highways improvements, etc. If there is an increase in capital investment opportunity for Torfaen going forward, it is perhaps something that members would want to consider in terms of that investment going some way towards affordable housing or land purchase, for instance.
I mean, really, like, I agree with what you say about 21st century schools, but we're getting rid of old schools and everything else, which could be of great benefit to the people who need homes. I mean, you know.
Yeah, just to confirm, the vast majority of those development opportunities that have become available over the last 5 years, they will have always come to Council in terms of consideration of what we utilise that land for. And members have decided to try to maximise the capital receipt to invest elsewhere as opposed to utilising it. There have been some positives in the last 2 or 3 years. There have been some of the smaller the primary school sites that come forward. And in fairness, we have had the support from resource colleagues and members subsequently then to utilise those sites for new affordable homes. So it's getting that balance right between a capital receipt that you've got flexibility to invest in other areas, other priority areas, or thinking about new developments and affordable housing.
And unfortunately, that's, it's politically influenced, isn't it? And we are where we are with that. There are lots of people that don't agree with some of the decisions that have been taken, but, majority rules at the end of the day. It's quite sad, really, to see Cwmbran being overtaken by private developers, because there is quite a risk, and people are thinking that Cwmbran in particular is going to become a commuter belt very shortly, a commuter town, and that's quite sad. Yeah. Anyway, 3.7 of the agenda. There's some information in there. 70 properties were developed, and then it sort of goes on to 62 delivered through Section 106. It goes on to say about the local market assessment, which identified 233. It's looking for why are these figures sort of so far apart? If it's the local housing market assessment, why do you think, is there a reason for that?
It's back to the conversation we've had throughout the earlier part of the discussions so far this afternoon. Really, it's about that land availability when it does become available, whether you utilise it for private development, whether it's used to maximise a percentage of affordable housing, whether you're bringing in a different sort of other products forward, etc., and the balance between that and investment in whether Section 106 agreements are utilised to again invest further in schools, local school improvements, etc., or highways improvements, etc. It's always that balance, isn't it, with Section 106? It's a case of you've got a range of options. Each of the service areas is asked to identify ideally what they'd like to get from the Section 106. Quite often, I would say, over recent times, affordable housing has been last in the queue.
Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. So this is page 22 of the report, 3.8. The local authority continue to work with landlords via the regional landlord hub. I've asked this question before, and I've still failed to see what happened since the last time I've asked it. But what are we doing to give better incentives to private landlords to put their properties up? I'm pretty positive I asked this last time and I still haven't seen anything.
Okay, apologies if you've not received an update from the previous questions. We have done a number of things over recent times. Part of the Landlord Hub meet on a quarterly basis, and I think what we've tried to do really is to establish what landlords would like to see us offer. So we have put together a draft incentive package offer, I suppose. That was circulated some time ago. I think we recognise we probably need to revisit that. Private rented sector landlords have basically said to us that two things in particular they're interested in: obviously making sure that the rents get paid, and that tenants act appropriately, which is right and proper in terms of any potential antisocial behaviour. I'm pleased to say the vast majority of landlords say to us that there is only a small minority of their tenants who conduct any antisocial behaviour, so they are in the minority. But unfortunately, there is a lot as a result of welfare benefit reforms, and I think I'm not going to swear and use the B word, but I think some of the uncertainty in our world at the moment, people losing their jobs and being threatened with job losses, etc. There is a fair amount, I suppose, and say welfare benefit reforms. There are a lot of people who fall into rent arrears through no fault of their own, etc. So it's something that we're going to have to consider and work on in terms of, I suppose, supporting private rented sector landlords in terms of making sure that they do get a return on their investment, quite frankly. But we can circulate, I suppose, the landlord incentive offer that we've put together. It is things like making sure they've got access to support and guidance and assistance from the housing team. It is making sure that they have got a contact from housing benefits within the housing benefit system if there are challenges or issues around people accessing housing benefits. It is ensuring that we support them in terms of them being a good landlord and make sure that they are registered on Rent Smart Wales as well. So there's, it's getting that balance right between them being a good landlord and also them having the right to a good tenant, etc. So we have got some information that we can circulate subsequently, which shows, I suppose, what an incentive, I suppose, offer we've developed with landlords through the private sector housing hub.
So it is actually only through the Landlord Hub that you deal with at the moment. You don't go out to all private landlords.
Yeah, because I mean that's kind of the thing I was trying to say. If I'm a landlord, which I'm not before legal tries to come after me. If I'm a landlord and I've got 5 houses, you're not coming at me to get my houses. Where's this information? Why isn't it publicised all over the place?
Really good comment. I think one of our conundrums is knowing who all the private landlords are. Probably, yeah, absolutely. The majority of the private landlords we believe are probably just, we call accidental landlords, might just be one property. We tend to know a number of our portfolio landlords. We use the Landlord Hub, so we do have marketing around that. We have the events quarterly, we try and circulate leaflets and things, but it's actually getting to find the private landlord. So any suggestions on how we can engage more would be very much welcome. We do operationally, we, on a day-to-day basis, you can imagine, we work with private landlords, often through our clients, our people who are using our services. And there are a number of other ways, such as the Rent Smart Wales work, where we might link in with our colleagues there as well. But I think anything that we can do to engage our private landlord partners more would be a massive plus.
Of course, you've just mentioned Rent Smart Wales. All of them are supposed to be licensed by now. But you also have your council caps department in this borough that have the access to that property being owned by somebody and rented out. So you have that database here somewhere, and that could be easily accessible. I am a private landlord, so I can't be talking too much about this because it's, but that is my suggestion as far as I have others, but it's not appropriate at the moment for me to say that. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. What are we doing about some of the sort of empty buildings that are left vacant throughout the borough? I mean, I can think specifically of sort of pubs and shops that are vacant and seem vacant for years and years. Schools, yeah. So what are we doing to sort of bring them back into use?
Can I specifically, so you're talking about commercial premises as opposed to residential premises? Yeah, so just to confirm this, we have got an active empty property strategy that focuses on residential properties. Yeah, the commercial properties that become available, quite often we will enter into conversations with our colleague RSL partners to see whether or not, it depends really much whether or not that property is up for sale, what condition it's in, etc. If we are alerted to commercial properties that become empty in the private sector, we do try to make inquiries around who owns the property, whether it's going to be made available to sell, etc. And we will try to work with the owner to see whether or not there is any potential for us to bring it back into use, potentially as residential as opposed to commercial. Obviously, we don't get involved in bringing a commercial property back into use, largely. So we do, anything we're alerted to, I suppose, that we will make inquiries. So it's not just land, it'll be buildings, anything that we are made aware of that is available. Quite often, in fairness to the RSLs, they proactively do a number of searches, I suppose, on a regular basis to see whether or not there are any potential development opportunities out there. And I know Mellon have done a number of those sort of opportunities in the past, as with Bronhaven going forward. So, basically, as long as we are made aware that something has become available, we will make inquiries about who owns the property, how long it's been empty, what the intentions of the owners are, and if there is any potential for us to enter into negotiations, etc., then we will do so with our RSL partners.
I was going to say, just to add to that, I think it has to link. We work with your regeneration colleagues as well. I mean, we've been involved for some time, and obviously the key landmark one for us has been the Clarence's up the road a few years back. But last year or two, there's been some vibrant and viable places. I think was the title of the fund monies, regeneration monies, and some authorities have spent more than others on that. But that's the kind of opportunity, I think, to if that money's coming in, because when you look at some of the premises, and there's one across the road here that we've looked at time and time again, to bring it back into a viable use and then to use it for residential, it does need some public money to go into it as well as the private. So I think things like, I don't know what's going to replace the vibrant, from Welsh Government, this is Vibrant and Viable Places programme, but the regeneration programme, if that could link into some of your master planning going on, what you're going to do with Pontypool, what you're doing with Torfaen, what you're doing with Blenavon, there may be ways of levering in some monies, and then we can get private investment on top of it. Because on its own, the private investment on its own won't work in certain areas. Otherwise, it would have just been sold on the market and someone else would have taken it on, really. So what we're trying to do, I suppose, is hit some of the landmark, because so Neil said the residential side there's an empty property strategy, but the commercial is just try and pick some of the landmark sites, and try and regenerate. And then the final thing, which is slightly outside our kind of remit, but it is of interest and concern to us, particularly because of our developments in Torfaen and in Cwmbran Town Centre at the moment. We're going through a sea change in commercial property, and the sad news of Debenhams this week, but we got Marks and Spencer's leaving Cwmbran, we got House of Fraser that's going to eventually go, isn't it? And I know that's Cwmbran shopping, and I know that's slightly different, but that again has an effect with on the footfall and what's happening around the town centre with the master plan. So they're all interlinked, but I think some of these things need some public regeneration monies to come into it, and then the private monies will come in. And testament to that is there have been some developments just at the top of the road where that's happened. What we haven't done is hasn't gone all the way down Thornhill Town Centre and beyond, you know. So
the conversation we were having yesterday is that, you know, there are some high streets, you know, Pontypool is victim to that to a degree. The, you know, social, you know, online ordering, etc., has a massive impact on that. But the conversion of, you know, putting flats above a commercial property, if you want to retain a commercial property, the planning process, and of course the, you know, all of the noise and all of the extra costs involved in that conversion, you know, will put developers off doing that. I've done it myself, and it does, you know, it's rather costly. So when a developer has the choice between buying a plot of land that's empty and buying a commercial property that needs, you know, so much more money spending on it, it's a no-brainer from their viewpoint. So we do need to incentivise that. We do need some you know, some council money or Welsh Government money to be able to incentivise, particularly RSLs, you know.
I was going to say that because we have got examples of that in Wales, and, you know, you can just see how the Cardiff as a capital has been transformed a lot. You know, there's been parcels of land in the city centre of Cardiff that you know, a lot of that has been primed. You then had private investment coming up on the back of it, but they've made available certain, you know, and you can see the transformation. So it is doable. The kind of shopping experience, you're quite right, you know, that's been, you know, been hit a lot by the kind of, you know, online. Although I see that this morning ASOS is in some difficulty, and they're a big online consumer. So it's not just down to the high streets, but it's trying to get the balance between living in town centres or city centres with accommodation and the retail, and it's a fine balance really. But you know, you do need some public prime monies coming in, I think.
Oh, we're on to the next question. I think we've sort of answered that one. Look above spaces. Do you want to add? Yeah, okay.
The thing is, you probably just covered some of this about open spaces above shops. I mean, we've got a lot of vacant shops, which got living spaces above them. You know, it could really alleviate the serious shortage of homelessness and people looking for some sort of property. So, I mean, really, we should be really targeting these particular things, no matter, you know, what the outcome is. We've got to really try, you know.
Yeah, Adrian mentioned, you know, the entrance to Pontypool earlier on. Over the last 12 to 18 months, we've also been able to secure sort of additional VVP monies for Pontypool Town Centre further inland, and myself and Councillor Downs have attended some launch events for new developments by Bronavon. So a couple of the former sort of commercial premises that existed in Pontypool Town Centre have also been brought forward. I think there's always so I think we've been very successful. I think Torfaen, again, was very successful over the last couple of years, probably to the detriment of other local authorities and who were frowned upon us because we were successful in bids that we put forward, and they weren't, unfortunately. Across Gwent, I think it was only ourselves and Newport who were able to secure VPP monies. So we have brought some properties back into use. I think the reality is, though, I suppose, whilst that's been a real positive for bringing back into use, I suppose, the flats above the shops, there have been some challenges in terms of bringing the commercial, attracting new commercial ventures to take up the shops that sit below those. And unfortunately, I went to Pontypool the other day and I saw that there's one or two of those still sort of empty, still struggling and not struggling to get tenants commercial offers off the ground. So it's trying to get that balance right, because I think that sends the wrong message as well for the business community, I suppose, in that there are commercial premises available and they're up for let and they're not available. Whilst that, like Alan said, that the flats have been brought back into use above. So we have had some success in say, attracting Welsh Government additional investment over recent years. But that's not always available, and I think sometimes they work on a basis that if you've been successful last year, then you probably won't be the year after, sort of thing. So,
Councillor Slade.
I'm mindful of the time.
Okay.
Happy to see if I can.
Councillor Thomas.
feel like I should say the same now, but I'll ask my question. It's page 23, 3.11. Good quality support, advice and information about housing. I'm again pretty sure I asked this question the last time that it came up. What are we doing more to promote that? You know, especially with the older generation suffering with IT skills or lack of. You know, what is? How are we getting that message out to the general public?
I suppose a range of different things. You know, if people are struggling, if people, for instance, apply to the Home Seeker register and let us know that they're having difficulties in registering, then the team are available. We are available on the phone to support people and talk them through how to do the registration, for instance. We will do home visits to make sure that people, we'll ask questions about whether they've got a support mechanism in place, if they've got a neighbour, a friend, a relative, etc. So we do make active inquiries about the individual circumstances. If somebody rings through to the housing service and says that they are struggling, haven't got access to the internet, for instance, a computer, etc., we'll do everything we can to make sure that we assist them in any way that we can. More broadly, I suppose, if people have got access to the internet or the websites, over the last 12 months we've done a lot of work in reviewing what information, advice and assistance that is available both on Torfaen Homes website and on the Council's housing pages of the Torfaen website. We're doing a lot more, I suppose, outreach work, so we're actually going out to communities and doing some surgeries now to make sure that we are more visible to members of the public. So we have got surgeries that are available in all parts of the borough to make sure to say that we are not expecting people to come to us, so we'll do more face-to-face discussions and inquiries rather than over the phone. So we've heard loud and clear the comments that have been made from members of the public about accessibility of services. So we've put a number of different new initiatives in place. I think we are more accessible. I think more can be done, and if members have got any more ideas or suggestions about how more accessible we can be, more than happy to consider those suggestions.
Could I add, Chair, please? Could I add? We also commission a number of support providers across the county, and we heavily rely on those organisations. Quite often we find that people don't want to come to us in the council. They would rather speak to the organisation that they feel more comfortable with, and a lot of the third sector organisations that operate across the county. So we heavily work with those and rely. We commission them, we contract with them formally. We took a report to Cabinet yesterday about a new contract, or a number of contracts. So there are a number of support workers across a whole host of organisations working in Torfaen who are housing-related support providers. It's a funding stream that comes through Welsh Government. So those support providers, we have a central referral and assessment gateway that operates within the housing service. So there's one contact point. Within that, there's a number of different service providers or organisations, one of which is a dedicated older person service for 50 plus. So we've got all those organisations and support workers operating across the county. There is a responsibility for those organisations to market their services, but we also market and advocate them too. What we found was that we need to do more. So if somebody refers in, they might have to wait until they've had an assessment. What we recognise is some people want something straight away. So we've got surgeries that, for example, homeless officers do across the week in different locations. We've also got complementary support provider surgeries, often with the homeless officer, so they can assist. Anybody can drop in, basically, in these surgeries. So we're trying to be more responsive to different people's needs. But we have got quite a large older person dedicated support service as well, which we can, it'll be part of the information that we provide after this meeting, and all the referrals come through a single gateway. So we try and make it easier for people to access.
So the surgeries that you provide that. So how do people know about the surgeries? Because if it's back to the internet, then those people are not getting that message, are they?
I mean, just to follow on from what Alka was saying, actually, generally they'll present at maybe like a satellite sort of charity, third sector organisation, a local organisation in the borough. So our task is just to make sure that they know about these surgeries and that they can then signpost the clients onto these surgeries. So I'd say probably most of the kind of the signposting is probably done in person via those sorts of third sector organisations, and we have certainly, whilst I've been sort of conscious of it, we've been working very well with third sector organisations in forming that path. So,
but what I mean is, Councillor Daniels, how is that message actually getting onto the street to the people who need to know about it? If they can't access computers, how is that message getting from yourselves and the third sector onto the street if they can't access IT?
Well, as I was saying, I mean, it's through these third sector organisations that message passes on, because they generally most likely present to an organisation that they trust, which is more likely a community-based organisation, faced and staffed by people like them from their communities who can communicate in a way that they can trust and feel comfortable in confiding in. So it is more often than not communicated via that, which I think is infinitely a better way than online or any other way, because you've got that degree of human empathy going on there. So that from my perspective, seems to be the most populous way of people being directed and signposted to these surgeries.
Referrals can be monitored, so it could be GPs, social workers, third sector providers, could be the Citizen Advice Bureau, TVA.
So in those, this is the kind of thing I'm trying to say. So in these areas, are they like leaflets or posters, or like in our rent offices, are there leaflets and posters where people can actually see where they can go to, and there's all the information, and this is who you need to speak to?
A number of the organisations there is a responsibility for the organisations we commission to market their services. So it could be Women's Aid, it could be Torfaen Mind. So people will access through those routes, as well as us proactively marketing their services.
Councillor Slade.
We sort of alluded to this earlier, didn't we, the Housing Wales Act. There are a number of statutory duties associated with the Housing Wales Act relating to gypsy and traveller communities. If we're talking in particular around the main elements of the Housing Wales Act are around homelessness and the allocation of accommodation. Around homelessness, there are a number of sections within the Act where we have duties. I suppose what changed from the previous legislation that we worked to was where our duty around homelessness, whereas previously we had a duty to assist those who are in priority need and non-intentionally homeless, we now have a statutory duty to proactively try and prevent homelessness. So our responsibilities have increased. So how that plays out, I suppose, is whoever presents to us, we will try and work with them and offer advice and assistance. Now that would be very much tailored to their housing needs. So individuals would potentially have a personal housing plan. So looking at that, it would identify what their housing related needs are. So the advice and assistance would be very much tailored to them. So for example, it would be, have you joined the Common Housing Register? We may work with a private landlord to see if we could save a tenancy. We would give them advice around the legalities of housing. So, for example, in the legal eviction. So it would be very different depending on each household. The other main part of the Act is around the allocation of housing, which sort of, in the main, links to homelessness. But there's other areas as well. So, as I mentioned, we've got duties around our gypsy and traveller communities. I'm trying to remember other elements of the Act. and assessing our responsibilities around assessing housing need.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Are we undertaking any activities sort of beyond the statutory minimum? And if we are, what do they cost us?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I would like to think, yeah. I would like to think we are doing way above our statutory responsibilities, and yes, I suppose there would be costs associated with that. But certain things we would be doing, for example, by using the Welsh Government Supporting People grant, we haven't got a statutory responsibility to use that grant and to use it to fund services, but we do. But it's paid for essentially through Welsh Government. There are a number of things that we... Yes, it's limited stuff as limited work that we do as a housing authority that isn't statutory funded, but there will be areas. For example, on the housing development side, we use a social housing grant to subsidise the development of affordable housing. That isn't necessarily a statutory responsibility. We've got a statutory responsibility to assess housing need and to try and work with the market. So it's a really complex question to answer.
The one thing I would say is that the housing service is reliant upon housing grant, Welsh Government housing grant, and is a minimum, I would say, there's a minimum amount of general fund allocation towards the housing service. I think the way that we've set up the housing service is that we have to comply with our statutory responsibilities, but we've been very creative and clever in terms of developing partnership working with RSL, for instance, in terms of joint funding of the Common Housing Register and the Home Seeker policy arrangements, etc. We've attracted inward investment in other ways, etc. So we've been quite innovative and creative in terms of trying to attract inward investment. So there's a minimum impact in terms of the cost associated to delivering the service by the council.
Thank you, Chair. And my last question, you'd be relieved to know. 412, there's figures in 412 which suggests that we've got 2 people sleep in Rough, and yet on page, whatever it is, you talked about different numbers. 31 individuals who were homeless, 10 of which were verified to sleep in Rough. So that was in 310. So it's on page, wherever it is, 310, paragraph 310, you talk about 31 people being homeless, 10 of which are sleeping rough. But then a couple of pages later you say that the figure is actually 2. So just can you clarify?
At the time of report writing, the figures in 3.10, I'm just looking for them, where you mentioned the 31.
Yeah.
Bottom paragraph.
Paragraph 310, yeah.
So the bottom paragraph of 310. It's November. Very bottom paragraph of 310.
Yeah. So that was at that period of time. That was the figure, which fluctuates.
Yeah.
In the bullet point on 4.12, we've got a responsibility as a local authority in Wales to undertake a rough sleep account once a year, which usually takes place in November. All local authorities in Wales do it on the same night, and we proactively go out. I can't remember the exact hours, but it's in the middle of the night, and we go out and look around the borough to try and locate people who are sleeping rough, or people who are sleeping out. At that point in time, we found 2 people. So that's reported back to Welsh Government, and that takes place across the whole of Wales.
Yeah, I actually joined for that count, and that was a bit of an eye-opener. And the count was informed by all sorts of knowledge, all sorts of knowledge. Leading up to it, leading up to it, we tried to get as much on-the-ground knowledge of where they are likely to be. I covered part of the south, and we went over and above. We tried desperately to look for as many people as we could find. I know anecdotally there are quite a few rough sleepers out there, but on that particular night we only found 2. But you know, we've been working with Cornerstone since 2018, and that has been a pretty good partnership actually, because I think it's a recognition that rough sleepers are incredibly complex. There's all sorts of backgrounds there, which mean that simply providing a home is not the end of the story. Anecdotally, I can remember one particular case that I was involved with, where the gentleman had been on the street for 20 odd years, and you know, through sheer hard work managed to get him into temporary accommodation, and the gentleman went missing twice. We found him, and he's been missing since, and it just highlighted to me the complexity behind rough sleepers. So the numbers, the differentials in the numbers has been explained, but I just wanted to add my own context because I joined for that night, and I would recommend if you were motivated to join as well. So.
Sir Ashley.
I wasn't here yesterday, so I've been asked to not say anything until then. Right, first question, housing improvements, private housing, which you've got quite a big section on here. I know you're responsible for it. My background's in that area, so I'll ask the questions. Housing improvement, private housing, what is the condition of the housing stock in the borough? You've got, I think it's 3.3. You mentioned quite a bit about that. It's a phenomenal, great figure there. The last time I think we did a housing stock survey was 2012. You say about getting grant on it here, you allude to it, and I know Alfred does a lot on this, or has done in the past, if we had crossed and said subject. You're also responsible for care and repair or monitoring it. Is it PSP or through that? Yeah, he's just gone, but I know you've got no lot about that. That's one question. Also, addressing vulnerable people through that service and the moving on, etc., etc. How do you manage that these days? I've got several other questions as well.
Would you mind highlighting the area of the port?
That's Pacific Capital Grant, and it's the most deprived areas. I mean, I'm also asking because I know these things go on. Obviously, we're area in South East Wales. How do we compare with other areas in South East Wales? Because it worries me, housing stock. There's lots of reports coming out, and South East Wales doesn't fare well, I suspect.
Again, a huge area of concern for us is the private sector housing position for Torfaen, not just for Torfaen, for Wales as well. We did undertake a more recent stock condition survey in 2017. We didn't have the best response, ironically, amongst residents of Torfaen, where surveys were offered of private sector properties. And I think because people have been subjected to so many door knocking about different types of work, some of the officers actually went out with the surveyors, and we didn't get an excellent response, albeit we got a report which pretty much says what we already knew back in 2010-11 when we did the previous private sector stock condition survey. And the report here in 3.13, the first paragraph, to bring each property, obviously it doesn't survey every property, it clones up the responses, to bring it up to WHQS would be 35,000 per property. So we know the private sector condition of stock in Torfaen is not, needs a support, albeit there will be some properties obviously that don't. If you recall, we previously received specific capital grant from Welsh Government, which came to an end a year and a half or so-ish ago, or 2 years ago, I can't remember. That basically subsidised our main housing renewal programme. That has ended, so that programme no longer exists as it used to. What we do rely on is, there's been a change from Welsh Government, we rely on loan products, which I took a report to Cabinet, I think it was a couple of months ago, but we rely on a number of different loan products. We have got a pot, it's about £1 million, where we can use and recycle monies to help private sector homeowners who meet the criteria to get improvements to their homes. So that's better than nothing at all, and that's really good. And they're interest-free loans as well. So that's available to residents if they want to apply and subject to a means test. The other area where we rely on, I suppose, for home improvement works in the private sector is where we can acquire energy efficiency type investment. And we've recently been successful working with Welsh Government, Eco Arbed, around some investment into the Trefethen area of Torfaen, which we're still working on. It's early days, we're still working on Welsh Government with that as well. So we're trying our best to get as much investment in, but we haven't got the specific capital grant that we used to have. So we've moved to sort of loan products, and when we can, we try and get energy efficiency investment into the borough.
Chair, the other question, you've got this list here. The minefield for homeowners, and especially vulnerable homeowners, on this, but at page 25, you've got a list there of stuff that's desirable. I read somewhere that every house in Britain, to answer global warming, that's one issue. The other is a comfortable home. I mean, global warming is actually in the well-being of future generations as a priority. It was written into it, if you look at it. That actually is an important point. We are going towards that as an authority, if you've not got there already, but it's written in there, and a lot of authorities in South East Wales are looking at it. But if you look at housing improvements as well, there was a paper written recently which suggested that every house should have those improvements you're looking at. And I noted in there, because I did read this quite carefully, boilers or renewable heat source pumps or something similar just save people a lot of money. They are very important. But to retrofit that little lot onto a normal house would be about 17 grand. But what is a minefield for homeowners is actually negotiating those out there that are good at it and those out there that are not good at it. Is there any way in which you can give that advice out, other than care and repair, to people that need negotiating? Because it is quite a minefield. And I just wonder, because the advice you give out is it's similar to what you do on the care front, but it just worries me.
Nest.
No, I asked you. It's a valuable part of the service, and it's worrying people. It's what we do on the Thanks.
Nest is one source of information. We haven't really got that skill set within within the housing department. Nest is one source of information. Yeah. Warm Wales and Ofgem as well. Citizen advice. And citizens' advice.
Which takes me back to the other questions that other councillors were asking you about Home Seeker, because this is one of my observations on it, having been, as David well knows, been through the experience myself. The one valuable thing is you have got the residual, the Communities First programme, and the thing that is really, really daunting, and I think other members might have been through this for people that are going through the process, and unfortunately I know about it by family members, is having somebody to handhold you through it. And if there's some way in which that system, because it's really, really painful, and it struck me that we need some sort of advocacy service to help people through it. I know you said that your officers are, make difficult decisions, and we've been through that one. The people that will help put through it. But advocacy on a similar basis to something like care and repair for tenants, I would wholly want to recommend, because and some of the stuff that's been, the stuff that came out of Communities First, those sort of people that can give non-judgmental support to people who are vulnerable, mentally ill, or people who have got disabilities, would be something that was in place to get people through that service. Would be one thing I'd like to recommend, because I've been through it personally as a family. And if there's something like that was neutral, it would be quite useful.
What I can say, Chair, is that I'm more than happy, I suppose, to deliver training on the home seeker policy and how to get yourself through, I suppose, the procedure to any organisation who can offer independent sort of advice and guidance support to members of the community. So if that's a suggestion, I suppose, is more than happy for the home seeker team to deliver training to a range of different organisations to help support. It can be quite a complex process to go through. I think we have done our best to try to make some of the guidance more user-friendly, using sort of plainer English, but also using pictorial sort of approach guidance to members of the public. But if you think that would be appropriate, we can deliver training to a range of groups, organisations, support providers, etc. To we have delivered about, over the last 3 or 4 years, we probably delivered about 3 member seminars on the home seeker policy, but I'm quite happy to do it again if that would help in terms of understanding the process and how it works.
I only make that very strong recommendation because it's not just my family, it's other people, and you guys, as much as you're well-intentioned and social, I think the social housing providers are, I think you do it as fairly as you can, and we witness that. And members get hot about it, and people get hot about it. If there was some sort of advocate, I did say the care and repair type model, something like that, there was an advocate for it, and there are people out there. It's what is needed, I reckon.
Duly noted. Faye? Sorry, is that better? I was just going to ask about universal credit and, you know, the terrible impact it's had on people and how you've managed to get through being a pilot authority with universal credit sort of brought into us, and how that has affected housing and all the needs around homelessness and things.
An enormous impact. Obviously, we were the first to go live with universal credit across all job centres in Wales. Obviously, we went live in July 2009. Time has passed. 17. Before some of the reprieves came in policy, such as a free phone number, such as the 2-week wait, such as a week to 6 weeks for a claim. The legacy, I think, for Torfaen is even past the February last year date, was it? I can't remember now. We find that the legacy is a number of people will have got into arrears with their rent. A number of people will have had other difficulties as a result, or other financial difficulties and hardship. We've noticed that with households presenting through homelessness. We've mitigated that to some degree, where we've been able to support people with tenancy arrears with some homelessness prevention grants, where we've worked very closely with our colleagues in the benefits department, who have been fantastic as well in trying to reduce the levels of debt and an inability to pay housing costs. We have an excellent welfare reform project group, which I think probably stands pretty much alone across the whole of Wales, which Councillor Daniels chairs, which we've been working on this way before universal credit came in, about how we mitigate. It wasn't just universal credit, bedroom, all the other range of welfare reforms. So it's had a massive impact. It still has an impact. I think we'll see the tail of it for years to come. We have had little additional resources to cater for it. We know that we've got full migration coming on soon to universal credit. I'm not an expert on universal credit, so we know there's more to come. So enormously, because housing costs are included in universal credit. So to have your monthly monies rather than your weekly rents, I could go on. Of any vulnerable household, and actually I'll take away the word vulnerable, any household, managing your finances in this day and age can be quite difficult, and it has had an impact on housing and homelessness and the affordability of housing per se. I can't comment on that enough.
If I could just supplement that, Chair, as well. Yeah, I agree. It's had a tremendous impact. We've had 2 years now, and it's still very hard to quantify the outcomes of it, really, because we were the guinea pigs. It was rolled out in Torfaen first, so they learnt lessons from what went on in our borough. So in the early days, there wasn't an advance payment. So now there is an advance payment of 100%, and that was gradually introduced. I think it was 50% initially, then it was 100%, and then they shortened the period of, or lengthened the period of time that you could pay it back. So there are different waves of people who will have been harmed in different types of ways by the rollout. So as the whole process has evolved, and many of them will still be paying the price now, many of them will still be paying the price for years to come, because at the time they will have got into debts, rent arrears that take ages to pay off. There will have been circumstances that came about that would never have happened under the legacy benefits, where they've accrued a certain level of debt and they've been evicted as a result. And that obviously has life-changing results on the individual or a family unit, if it's a family unit. We have tried to put as much, as many interventions in there as possible. We have invested hundreds of thousands of pounds, despite receiving, I think, £1,020 from the DWP for the administration costs. So it's generous of them. It has been a significant challenge in Torfaen, and it will continue to be a significant challenge in Torfaen. A few of the aspects in particular to highlight are the fact that it gets paid directly to the tenant, where housing benefit was obviously paid directly to the landlord. Landlords, unsurprisingly, prefer the former because they were secured their rent. There are mechanisms there to get it paid to the landlord now, but still it is, evidence on the ground seems to be that it's deterring landlords. So when we have the conversation about private landlords and how we get them to take up the increasingly risky business of being a private landlord, this is one of the key tenets, one of the key issues that we're battling against as a borough, and how we address it, I don't know. You've also got the aspect of the payment going to one of the couples, so that increases and exacerbates the likelihood of domestic abuse and the destabilisation of a household. I mean, I could go on, and I'm more than happy to supply more thoughts on this after the meeting, because I'm just reeling this off from memory now. But it's had a tremendous impact in Torfaen, and it will continue to, especially when the next wave comes.
Could I just ask further on that? Thinking of teenagers and the pressure on the home, on everyone, is there a hidden crisis, do you think? We only see the tip of the iceberg on things like sofa surfing and things amongst young people who are not presenting as homeless, but probably are, because their families just can't afford to keep them at home now, and that exacerbates all sorts of things, crime, everything, doesn't it? And I just wondered, are you working with anyone, because you were one of the first authorities to do this, as far as perhaps somebody from a university to gather this information, to put it to like the Rowntree Trust or whatever, and perhaps learn lessons from it and be able to put this into some sort of policy for how you've coped and things that might have come out of this? And another part of that is, do you meet regularly, I'm sure you do, with social services, the third sector, and have you got lists and things where you look at people who could possibly be vulnerable that are not presented in the way that perhaps other people are? Which also links into Dave Thomas's question about making things, more, so people can see where they can go if there are problems. But I just wondered if you had lists as well as regular meetings.
I suppose there's the regular meetings, which is more of a strategic group through the Welfare Reform Project Group, which includes third sector. Myself, I'm representative of social care and housing, and all the RSLs are very much engaged because it's obviously a key area of their concern as well. Operationally, we would exchange information as we would in the normal practice around vulnerable families, etc. I don't think we've done enough in Torfaen to understand. It's very difficult to understand the impact and how we can mitigate the welfare reforms. In relation to young people and households, there's been a well-developed, we've got various forums that share benefit information. We have Supporting People in Homelessness Inclusive Forum. where all the providers are operating and local authority representatives meet, so we keep everybody briefed on welfare reforms and disseminate information. We've got the nifty, thrifty pieces of work. So there are various sort of communication groups and fora that we try and disseminate to all organisations who share them with the clients that they're working with, or the households that may be presenting. And there's a lot of training that's taken place over the years to sort of educate professionals or practitioners or whatever around the welfare reforms, because they are so complex. I suppose the other key area, I think, for me is the role of the DWP, who always attend the welfare reform group. We have regular updates. They've had training around understanding vulnerability for the clients that are presenting at job centres, so that they can try and recognise if somebody's vulnerable but doesn't actually say they're vulnerable, so they can look at alternative payment arrangements or put other types of support in place. It's an ongoing sort of journey.
Can I just ask, private landlords also included in this group? You know, you said Bronavon are very good at this, and Mellon and the other housing providers. There's not a gap with private landlords, perhaps not understanding or knowing or being able to share their worries about families or vulnerability.
Richard Davis has regularly given briefings at the private landlord hub around welfare reforms, and again we circulate information as we can.
On to our last question, Stuart.
Well, one was about data setting, and I want to finish off where Faye was going on that one, because one thing that struck me immediately when you were conversing earlier was simple stuff about vulnerable groups. I mean, I know autism well. Considerably more people with autism within the adult spectrum and not in relationships. You immediately got some there that were a good percentage of them, considerably more than Alan's 2,500. There's an awful number of people in those vulnerable groups, a lot of whom would possibly not want to be at home with mother and father, or whoever is caring for them. That immediately strikes me as a possibility there. The other aspect of this was, somebody suggested to me, amongst the people I know, about being better informed about what tenancies were in terms of detail. That was just finishing off what I'd said before, because the other point I really want to completely say something differently about was, if you want to find land and things, was actually looking at something I've been banging on about for a while, because David knows this one well, was place planning, and how we identify these sites. And if we've got a place planning exercise going on through the borough, community councils, communities, etc., I think getting people to buy into this process, because it would stop some of the objections that people have about losing green land, etc., and getting the community to buy in, because I think we've had conversations on this, and I think getting a buy-in for brownfield sites especially, because there are places which I think the community would be willing to look at, especially if we're looking at vulnerable people who are related to people. It's getting a virtuous circle. And it struck me immediately, this whole conversation we're having about it, and the conversations we're having about maybe people who not move, if we're looking at sites. And I think people are also talking about homeless people, maybe smaller housing units and people moving on. Maybe we've got to get the community to buy into looking at this, and maybe sacrificing bits of land in places, maybe, you know, there's land that's been underutilised, not obvious building land. And maybe people have to look at their own homes. I've got a house that's got a big garden, for instance. How you build onto houses, looking at more innovative use of house design, maybe with houses big, not looking at selling houses off, which is what I look at all the time with planning and stuff like that. More innovative uses. There's practice like this all over the place around the country. Maybe looking at building on like we used to in the past with older persons annexes and stuff like that. There's some practice around from Planning Aid Wales and people like that. That's what we've got to look at. Maybe doing it for yourself in some cases, so we get better use of it. We've got intergenerational happening, haven't we?
Thank you for your observation.
Just make an observation.
We're going to move on now. I'm mindful that we are really running over time. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. I hope we haven't been too difficult. But thank you very much. We don't really need you to stay for the next bit. You know, it's mindful of the time. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just make an observation as we finish? You know, it's been a really interesting sort of conversation and discussion this afternoon, and I'm really pleased that some of the issues that have emerged, I suppose, have given us food for thought, and I've made a number of different notes of taking some actions forward. Obviously, we'll liaise with Becky in terms of the formal sort of process of recommendations that come out of the committee. But more than happy to meet up separately or collectively with members, in terms of some of the good ideas and suggestions that have come forward today, because we don't want to lose those, and we will build upon some of the ideas that have been identified and make some progress with them.
And thank you for that offer. I'm sure that there are a number around the table that will take you up on that. I know I will be. Thank you. I know that we've had Dawn Hughes, one of our partner support agencies. She's provided written responses to some of our questions that has been circulated. I'd like to thank her for those responses. They were excellent and were very thought-provoking. So thank you to Dawn Hughes. So we now go on to the next step, really, where we formulate our recommendations. So Becky, if you'd like to.
Yeah, if I can just draw members' attention to the scrutiny activity for this item, which is to consider the approach taken for delivering the local housing strategy and assess how the housing service and its partners are performing against the strategy and whether they are meeting the aims and objectives. So, have members got any views on that before I?
Yeah, the only things that really strike out to me, which is what we've obviously touched on yesterday, when we did our pre-questions, were the review panel, whether we can make a recommendation of there being a review panel after a decision has been made on which was that one, and then the percentages of more affordable housing being built with private, that being raised from 30% to something more sufficient. But substantially higher than what it is, because I mean we're losing out hand over fist every time, especially when we're sacrificing our green space.
I'm just aware that we don't want to build huge estates like we used to, do we? Now we want to have perhaps private housing mixed with rented accommodation, mixed with perhaps something that's rented from Bronavon or something similar, so that we do not have sink estates, if you see what I mean. And I think perhaps that for a village like Cwmbran and for a small borough, I think that's perhaps the way forward, rather than having huge estates which then have lots of social problems.
I think from my perspective, a lot of the new developments in specifically Cwmbran, they take the Section 106 money and it's being used to support 21st century schools. Yeah. So however much percentage is being charged in Cwmbran, if they choose to take it as a monetary value instead of building those houses, that's a choice that council makes. And I think through the LDP process, we should be looking to demand that if there is a 30% or a 40% provision for social housing, affordable housing, whichever, then we should be demanding that housing is being built, not monetary value being taken out to support.
Aren't they all doing that now, though? Because I know a few of them have done it.
Yes.
A lot of them are, but is that the right thing? Is it the right thing when we have the housing that we have?
It's a discussion we had in another place. If you've got 30% housing, you actually build for rent public housing, which is what Newport does, it's a different term. If you just have an allocation of social housing, the stigma on that is terrible. If you actually call it for rent public housing, in effect, council housing, isn't it? You create a different terminology. It's not got the stigma. But you hear what I'm saying? Yeah.
I don't know where that forms in the recommendation.
But but if you're going to build it, you actually build it as house for rent, as opposed to having an allocation, because a lot of them don't build it.
I get what you're saying, Steve.
Yeah.
I don't know where that it wouldn't.
No, I'm making that point.
Yeah, I just think that there are significant omissions in this strategy. There's nothing in there about innovative sort of housing solutions, particularly for homeless people. Nothing in there about making the north more attractive to people, which I think is appalling. If there's been identified as a problem, then surely we should be addressing the problem. You know, and they say, and I just think it really is. Even if there may be just sectors of the communities, like elderly people might find it more attractive to live up there. The fact that there's no jobs up there, I think, might be irrelevant to them. Do you know what I mean? I just think there's not been any kind of... I don't see a strategy here. I just see a lot of talk. There's very little in terms of action. And I think certainly kind of finding out why people don't want to move up to Blaenavon or up the north, you know, or what can be done to make it more attractive to people. To me, that would be kind of no-brainer, really. I know, and that might encourage more people to develop housing up there as well.
Just jumping on the back of that, what Alan's saying is exactly right. I mean, the promotion of that needs to be much better than it is. There's no promotion there at all, is there? So it's like when you're advertising a holiday, you know, without the advertisement, you ain't going to want to go there. So the promotion needs to be a lot more.
Me, when you jumped in, rude independent member.
Yeah, totally.
What I'm saying is we need to integrate more with the private landlords for the letting. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, you know, if we're going to sell off land in prime land, in the most
got to pay for it.
part of where people want to live, then we need to really look and readdress what we're doing. But clearly, we're not doing it right.
No.
Communication with private landlords is sadly lacking, but I think we've already got that there.
Yeah, and I did have, they mentioned the draft incentive package and how that's sort of not being pursued, so whether you want to recommend it, a focus being more on that.
The person I was talking, family members going up to the north, that if you're going to put people from one part of the community to the other, they need a support package. In fact, what you need is a development package to go with them, because they're not used to that community. So rather than just putting them there, they need to go with the other part of what it is as a community support package, which they don't have. You're expecting people to go from one part of the community to the other. So those two are right, actually. You do need to go there with some sort of package for them to live there.
Well then.
Yeah, you're right. They get dumped somewhere they don't know. Yeah.
I was just going to say Blaenavon's a long way off and the roads are not always as good as they could be, but we've just had European funding to improve the Merthyr roads, haven't we? I mean, is that something we could advertise that is now making it perhaps a bit easier to live at that side, because you can easily travel to other places that perhaps you couldn't before?
With Councillor Thomas's point about the whole promotion and those areas.
The infrastructure that goes with where people are living within the community. Yeah. That's what it is.
You try
You've got to get it.
Do it. Seems a bit rich. I mean, Blaenavon isn't somewhere brand new, is it? I mean, it's been there since God was a boy. The fact the infrastructure's poor is down to the council, isn't it?
Yeah. Stagecoach.
Well, it's down to the authority or the assembly or someone. It's not just... doesn't happen by accident. Torfaen is the only valley, as far as I know, in South Wales where we don't have a dual carriageway from bottom to top. Why? I mean, there's been no transport solutions proposed, as far as I know. There's nothing in the South Wales Metro, for instance. Nothing for that valley at all. So these questions, that, you know, It's a bit of a thing to say that, well, we know it's not very attractive, but we're not doing anything to make it more attractive.
You're right.
It comes in a package. Find out why people don't want to go up there and then address those reasons. And if infrastructure is one of them, address it. That's fine.
Could we address that with European money like they did in Merthyr, do you think?
But a simple thing like a 7 o'clock in the morning bus down from there to get somebody to Cardiff, bet is simple, really. Even it's got to be subsidised.
Most of the bus services are subsidised, aren't they? But we are really going a bit sort of skewer. Are there anything? Could you possibly run through all of those for us then, Becky?
So I've got the recommendation with regards to implementing or considering the implementation of a review panel for housing appeals. When looking at developing the local development plan and the percentages for affordable housing, that they look to work together and increase the percentage, and that when they ask for a percentage of the provision, that they demand that houses are built, not the monetary value. Councillor Slade, you raised that there are significant omissions within the strategy, and you recommend that work is carried out to find out why people don't find certain areas within the borough attractive to live in, and then act on those findings. Councillor Thomas, your recommendation with regards to promotion of the areas, greater promotion on what makes them attractive. And then the recommendation with regards to integrating more with private landlords and highlighting the draft incentive package.
The other one is, like the first question, oh, sorry, the first one is, are they going to supply us any information? Is there going to be any future checks to see whether people are having an RSL property as well as having private property?
Yes, so in terms of action points, I've got to come back on those statistics that you asked for. Also statistics with regards to the home seeker movement. Another action point, they said they would pass on the referral pathways for the financial inclusion team and also the referral gateways for housing services in hours and out of hours services. And if there are any gaps in those that you find once you've had that information, if you feed those back, and I'll get those back to you. Documents that Alca was discussing when discussing the statutory requirements from Welsh Government and homelessness.
There was something else. In private housing condition survey, there was a lot in there she said about that stuff as well. I really think we need that in there because that's a considerable amount of the housing market. And there was a whole lot of stuff in there about access to. And I did say about advocacy for vulnerable groups on there. You did say, that's a good one.
Yeah, touching on Councillor Thomas's point about the review, or the appeals process, I'd be quite keen on a seminar on the home seeker policy, because I'm not entirely comfortable with the policy as it stands. So I think a seminar and perhaps a review, maybe the appeals process could be a part of that review, if you like.
Excellent idea.
If you two are going to question it, how do you... the one big question about it, if you want to know, is how do you actually see anything about the property before you see it? Because I know what the answer is.
Councillor Ashley, I'm sure you'd be part of the...
One of the questions I had was because there's no preview of the property before you see it.
No,
it's a big question.
It's quite a few deficiencies, I think.
That is one of the major... what they could provide, which is actually a short video of every property, would make life a lot easier. When they asked about that, I know what the answer was. It would be very simple to do it with a phone, just,
Fair, you have a question?
Yes,
or a recommendation?
Well, I know that we did have a talk on the banding system, and I found it very complex, and I just wondered, I know it's been messed with a few times, but is there any way they can simplify it?
Make it transparent.
Make it transparent.
Right, the members, thank you very much. As you know, this is the last in this year's cycle. I'd like to thank you all for your dedication, your excellent work. I think we have made some changes, specifically in the civil enforcement, etc. Route. So I'd really like to thank you for all your hard work and dedication. I'd like to thank both Becky and Chris, who have been absolutely brilliant. I don't know if I will be chairing this moving forward because we have a new, a whole new AGM, etc. in May. So I'd like to personally thank you all for your dedication, commitment and sterling work on this scrutiny that, of course, will change names from May to Prosperous, I believe. Yes. Thank you. And that's the meeting closed.